You're watching Wild Encounters with the BC Wildlife Park. My name is Sylvie, and today I have two special guests. Here we have Lila, the western painted turtle, and Avalanche, the red-eared slider. Every animal here in the park has a story as to how they got here, and these two are no exception. So Lila is here because her habitat was destroyed and she needed a new safe place to live. And Avalanche is here because she was a pet who was surrendered to us. Now, at a glance, these two turtles may look very similar, but they're actually two completely different species. Both can be found here in BC in freshwater habitats, but western painted turtles, like Lila, are actually the only native pond turtle species in BC, and red-eared sliders are invasive. So it's important to be able to tell the difference between the two species, so you can tell if you find a turtle in the wild if it's invasive or not. So the easiest way to tell the difference is to look on the red-eared slider's head. They have this red ear mark, which isn't an ear at all, but they have this mark on the side of their head. And the painted turtle does not have that. You'll also notice the yellow stripes on the western painted turtle are brighter, and there's more of them than there is on the red-eared slider. You can also compare their shells. So on the western painted turtle, on the lower shell called the plastron and the upper shell called the carapace, they have this glowing red or orangish color, whereas the red-eared slider just kind of has some black spots. One last way to tell the difference is the size. So you usually can't tell unless you're comparing side by side. But you can see here that Avalanche is quite a bit larger than Lila, even though she's a few years younger. And they're both going to continue to grow throughout their lives. So Avalanche will have more growing to do still, so you can imagine that she will become the significantly larger turtle. So you know how to tell the difference between these turtles, but where can you find them? The western painted turtle is the only native pond turtle species left in BC. They can be found from western Ontario over to BC and down into the central United States. In BC, you'll find an interior population in the Thompson-Okanagan area, and you'll also find a coastal population at the Fraser Valley and on Vancouver Island. But it's important to mention that both of the populations of the western painted turtle in BC are dwindling. So here in the interior, they're considered threatened, and in the coastal population, they are endangered. And unfortunately, one of the causes of the western painted turtle's shrinking numbers is the red-eared slider. So red-eared sliders are native to the south central United States and down into northern Mexico. They ended up in ponds here in BC because they're very popular in the pet trade. But turtles require a lot of really specific care as pets, and a lot of them often freeze to death or starve to death. And lots of people who adopt turtles end up realizing that they're not quite up for the challenge, and they end up releasing them into the wild. So they may think they're doing the right thing, but actually that causes a lot of problems for the native species like the western painted turtle. Because every species of animal has specific needs for food, water, shelter, and space. And it just so happens that these two turtles have very, very similar needs, and so they end up competing. So the turtles' shelter and space needs are tied to their habitats. Both species are semi-aquatic freshwater turtles who live in and around permanent bodies of water at least 1 meter deep, typically in the marshes and shallows of lakes, ponds, ditches, and slow streams. They look for places with muddy bottoms and lots of aquatic plants. They also need to have pond-side sunny basking places and nearby nesting sites. They nest away from water in places with loose soil or gravel, free from too much vegetation, so the kind of ground that's easy for a turtle to dig in. That leads me to talking about turtle reproduction. So both of these species of turtles will mate in the springtime, just after hibernation. And the males will have to try and woo the females to be the ones who get to mate with her. So usually a bunch of males will chase after one female as kind of a race to mate with the female. The males also do some different displays. Particularly red-eared sliders will use their long claws, which are longer than the female's claws, to scratch at the female's face. They may also do something called titillation, which is where they shake their claws underwater to create vibrations near the female's eyes. The males can also bite the females or swim on their backs in front of them. So when a male successfully woos a female, they will sink to the bottom of the pond to mate. Interestingly, females can also store viable sperm inside their bodies for up to 3 years and produce multiple clutches or groups of eggs from one mating. Western painted turtles will only lay 1 clutch per year of about 6 to 8 eggs, and red-eared sliders will produce multiple clutches of up to 30 eggs each time. It's not currently known if red-eared sliders in BC are producing viable offspring, but it is known that they're going through the motions of nesting and laying eggs, and so they are competing with the western painted turtles for those nesting sites. They both build their nests up to 150 meters away from their pond in loose gravelly areas where they will dig a 1-foot hole and bury their eggs in the soil. Western painted turtles and red-eared sliders have very similar diets, which is one of the main reasons why their species are in competition with one another. So juveniles of both species are carnivorous. They eat only meat, things like tadpoles, small fish, and invertebrates that they find in the pond. As they get older, they become opportunistic omnivores, which is kind of just a fancy way of saying they'll eat anything, anytime. So they eat lots of aquatic plants and algae, and also meat like small fish and snails, sometimes frogs, and sometimes carrion or dead and decaying animals. Some fun facts about how the red-eared slider hunts is it will actually skim the surface of a pond like a baleen whale with its mouth open. And so it swims around collecting algae in its mouth, and when it gets full, it closes its mouth and shoots the water out of its nose and swallows the algae. Also, both species cannot swallow food unless they're underwater, simply because they can't swallow dry food. Now I want to get into a question round and answer some frequently asked questions that we get in our turtle encounters here at the park. They actually aren't as slow as you might think. As you can see, Lila and Avalanche are running around a lot, and if I'm not watching them carefully, they will run right off the table in no time. They're even better at getting around in the water thanks to their webbed feet on their hind legs. But the reasons that they aren't particularly fast animals, one of them is that their shell is very, very heavy, and it does weigh them down a lot. They're a bit clunky. They're not really designed for speed. Also, they are ectothermic animals, meaning they are cold-blooded and they have a slow metabolism. So they don't have teeth, but instead they actually have a beak like a bird. And it's a structure made of fibrous proteins called keratin. And so part of the reason why they can't swallow dry food is that lack of teeth, because they can't chew it. And so instead they rip off pieces of food with that beak, and it's quite sharp and quite strong. So lots of people also ask if turtles can bite, and they certainly can. And with that beak, if a turtle bites you, it will hurt. A turtle cannot leave its shell. Turtles aren't so much inside their shells, but rather they are their shells. Turtle's spine is actually part of the carapace, or the upper shell, and everything inside is just all the turtle's guts and insides. Turtles are born with their shells, and they grow with them throughout their entire lives. They can also feel through their shell, so Avalanche knows when I'm touching her. Turtle shells are made of a type of keratin called beta keratin. We think of keratin as the protein that forms our hair and nails, but that type of keratin is alpha keratin. Beta keratin's only found in birds and in reptiles, and it's much stronger than the alpha keratin. Beta keratin doesn't flake off as the animal grows the way that alpha keratin flakes off of our skin all the time. So snakes shed their skin because the beta keratin in their scales doesn't flake off. And in a similar way, turtles shed the scales or the scutes on their shells as they grow for the same reason. So lying in the sun is a behavior called basking. And because turtles are cold-blooded or ectothermic animals, like all reptiles, they don't have internal functions that help them regulate their body temperature. So instead, they need to use their environment to do what's called thermoregulation, which is to warm and cool their bodies from the outside. So turtles lie in the sun or bask in the sun on rocks or warm logs as a way of finding the warmest place in their habitat to warm their bodies. Red-eared sliders in particularly will be found forming turtle towers or stacking on top of one another as a way of trying to get closest to that heat source. So the answer is no, but sort of yes. So turtles breathe oxygenated air like we do, but in the wintertime they actually hibernate under the water. So how do they breathe? In a way they kind of don't. They can really slow their metabolism down a lot, so they don't really have the processes going on in their body that requires them to breathe much. But they do need some oxygen, and the way that they get it is actually really fascinating. So in simple terms, we say that turtles breathe through their butts, but the more fancy way of explaining it is that they do something called cloacal respiration. So the cloaca is an organ which is sort of the turtle's butt, but it's kind of also the reproductive organ of the turtle. And so turtles absorb oxygen from the water as it passes over their blood vessels, and it just so happens that the place in their body with the most blood vessels is the cloaca. It's actually really hard to tell with reptiles because all of their organs are on the inside, so you can't just look and find out really easily. There's not a lot of sexual dimorphism between males and females in the western painted turtle or the red-eared slider. They look very, very similar. There are a couple of ways to tell. The main one is their tail. So the males typically have a bigger, thicker tail, and they also usually have longer claws. So with Avalanche, the only real reason we know she's a female is because she was someone's pet and they knew what sex she was. And with Lila, we actually don't even know for sure. It's just a best guess based on her tail and her claws. Both species can be quite long-lived. The western painted turtle can live up to about 30 years, and the red-eared slider can live up to 40. However, the most critical part of both species' life is the first couple of years as they're developing into maturity, because young turtles are much more susceptible to predation. Once they reach maturity, they're much more likely to live a full life after that. Everyone has their own idea of what makes a good pet, but it is important to mention that turtles are not like cats or dogs. They won't show you affection, they won't cuddle with you, they won't play with you. They're a completely different species with different behaviors and different needs. So turtles require a ton of work and specialized care. So we just always recommend that anyone considering adopting a turtle does lots of research and knows for sure that that's a commitment they're willing to take on. It's also important to mention that the western painted turtle should not be kept as a pet because they are a native species to BC, and it is illegal to collect native species from the wild here to keep as pets. I hope you've enjoyed learning about turtles with me today, but before we go, I need to talk about one more really important topic, which is conservation of the western painted turtle. As I mentioned, this species is threatened in some parts of BC and endangered in others, which means that without our help, over time they will go extinct or at the very least become extirpated or all gone in BC. The main cause for this species' demise is humans. Mainly through habitat loss because of urbanization, climate change, and wetland habitat alteration. Also predation from domestic cats and dogs, getting hit by cars when crossing the street, and also the release of the red-eared slider into the wild. So it's important if you have a pet turtle you can no longer care for that you don't release it into the wild, but rather you should find it a new home. You can take it to a pet store or to an animal shelter and they can rehome it for you. The continued survival of this species into the future is ultimately up to us, but luckily there are really easy things we can do every day to protect the western painted turtle. So when you're out in a habitat where a turtle like this might live, It's really important to watch your step and make sure you're not trampling nesting sites or other elements of their habitat. Also, keep your pets on a leash so they're not running off and damaging the habitat either. And always leave nothing and take nothing. Sometimes you might see a turtle trying to cross the street and you can help them do that. So the best thing to do is to just watch out for cars and wait for them to finish crossing on their own. But if there is immediate danger, you can pick them up to help them cross. So you need to pay attention to the direction that they're going, and then you can just hold them on either side of their shell nice and tight and carry them low to the ground in the air for as little time as possible and place them down just on the other side of the road. Lastly, even though these turtles are really cool, it can be tempting to take them home, but we do always recommend following a love it and leave it policy. I want to thank you for tuning into my turtle talk today. If you want to learn more about these species, you can visit our website at bcwildlife.org or visit us in person here at the park in Kamloops, BC. Hope to see you here sometime. Bye!